All right, what is going on, guys? Today I want to talk about React, and more specifically, 5 things I wish that I knew when I started React. I started React about 3 years ago, and I want to give you the 5 tips I would give myself. These aren't going to be stuff like, this is what useEffect does, this is what useState does. There are a billion videos out there which will tell you that. I want to give you a few tips that would have led to me just writing better React code and would have led to me using the framework more effectively and making better stuff. It'll make sense when I get into it, but I'm going to be using a little Next.js demo because let's be honest, if you're writing React these days, you're using Next.js. We basically all are. And yeah, that's about it. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and let's get into it. All right, for number 1, the first tip is that you can put multiple components in one file. Now, I know for a lot of you that's going to sound really bizarre, like no duh, of course you can. But for me, this was a big thing because the way I was taught to program, and especially at school and through different things I'd done, I was very much in the mindset where every function, every piece had to have its own file. So when I would write React code, especially when I started, most of the projects that I built, especially any that were even remotely real and got to production, would have a billion files in them. My components directory would have like 50 things in it, and it would have the tiniest little things. And I'm embarrassed to say that I've started doing this recently, like 6 months recently, but you can put multiple components in one file and it will make your development a lot nicer. And really the sort of add-on to this tip is that big files are your friend. Let me show you an example. For the remainder of this, I'm probably going to just keep using this demo over and over again. It is a basic to-do app. It is nothing special. Again, there are a billion tutorials out there on how to do this. I'll make the code available down below if you want to look at it, but I mean, it's a to-do app. We've all seen them before, but really what I wanted to illustrate here is the way I did this is I have 2 components in here, which I wrote. I have this to do and this create to do. These 2 things, I am putting them in this file. So I have all of this stuff within index.tsx, and I have my to do down here and I have my create to do down here. This is something that I never did for the longest time, and it makes your code so much nicer because imagine if I had to go and I put my to-dos and my create to-do in a components directory out here in source. So if I wanted to update the to-do, I'd have to go to that other file and then I'd have 3 things open and then extrapolate that out to a real site where you have like 20 different components. Then you have 20 things up here and it gets impossible to keep track of everything. You have to name everything versus here, I just have this to-do. I just work with it in here. And then if I ever do need to reuse it, then I can extract it out, put it in a components directory, and we're good. This just makes it easier. And the sort of side point to this is don't be afraid of big files. This is another thing I've sort of realized is that big files aren't a bad thing because what they allow you to do is they allow you to effectively put things that make sense all together in a file, but then you can break them down into really understandable bite-sized blocks. When you have walls of JSX, walls of this HTML with JavaScript mixed in, it gets really hard to read really fast. So the natural inclination is to just break it down into components. That's what you want to do. But if you put those across different files, you end up with a new form of complexity versus if you just can break them down into logical pieces. Imagine you have a dashboard. Imagine you're building out this dashboard right here, these React docs. What I could do is I could create components for each of these, but then I could have this whole thing be one giant file. Now, you obviously wouldn't do that here, but just bear with me for this example. We have this whole thing be one giant file. Then we have a component, which is this side nav, and then that side nav has these little, has these links within it, and all that breaks down really nicely. So if I want to deal with any logic involving the side nav, I have a very understandable little piece over here that I can look at in code, say that would correspond to like this to do, or something like that. I know that for experienced people, this is obvious, but this is something that I didn't know, and I bet a lot of people didn't really even think of this either. So put multiple components in one file, just separate them as it makes sense. There's no real law on how to do this, just do what makes sense. The next tip is that React is just a giant tree. So the way I think of React at this point is that everything is a tree and everything flows down this tree. So what do I mean by that? Let me show you this little diagram I quickly threw together that shows you what the app I just built is. So I have the app.tsx, which is the head of this tree. When I look at this right here, this is the root that renders the component. If I went in here and let's just go ahead and let's put a div in here and put that in here, put an h2 in here, and then say hello from the root, and then we'll open up our parentheses here. When we do that and I get this put in here and I go back over to my home thing, you're going to see hello from the root, because every single page and every single thing in this app is going to be rendered from here. So if you're not familiar with the tree data structure, effectively what it is it just everything flows down the tree basically, and it can be represented like via nodes like this. So the app is just this file right here. So this is the head of the tree. Then we go down and we have index.tsx. This is below it in the tree, and this gets slotted in right here within component. You can see HTML, it makes a lot of sense for this tree-like structure because it has this parent-child relationship where this div is the parent of this h2 and this component is just index.tsx. So that means that index.tsx is a child of app. So you can kind of have this mental model then of everything in React flows down this tree. And that gets really useful when you want to actually write the code within these functions. So right here, I have this home. So this home is index.tsx. That would be this node on the tree right here. Now, once I have this node on the tree, I can then put stuff within it. And the things I'm going to put within it are going to be this create to do section. So I do hello world. This will create a new to do. And then this shows up right here. So this is a component, which is a child of the home page. And then this is a component that's also a child of the home page. Within the code, it looks like this. So I have right here, the to do component is a child of the home component, just like the create to do is a child of the home component. And now you might be thinking, why does that even matter? Why do I care? All I need to know is I just put these in here. But it's really useful when you need to have your components talk to each other, because something that you're going to constantly deal with is I'm going to be looking at my data structure. I'm going to be looking at my page structure or whatever, and it's going to look something like this. A real page, like let's look at the Tailwind docs or something. I was not looking. Yeah, there we go. We can pretend I know how to install Tailwind. So if we look at like this page on Tailwind, you can imagine how many different pieces we have. We have like the root, which would just be the home of the page. So we would have like app.tsx. Let's imagine this is built in next. It probably is. Then we have the home page. This is what we're looking at right here. Then we have underneath this a ton of different children. So this nav bar is probably a component. But then within that nav bar, there are more children like the components and templates. We need to figure out how to get these to communicate with each other. What if I click this button and that needs to make something happen over here? If we look at our data structure over here, I would need to get this to do to communicate with the create to do. And then what you can now see when you understand that it's a tree is that you have to pass that data up like this or have some way of communicating with them. The context parameter, which is something that if you've ever installed something like Auth0 or TRPC or React Query or whatever, you always have to wrap your app.tsx with something. You're always wrapping it with like TRPC handler or something like that. And when you're wrapping it, what you're doing is you're setting something up at the root that all of these different components can communicate with. I don't pretend to know how it works under the hood and exactly how they're doing it, but I'm willing to bet that it's some form of context, and the way the actual context object works, which is a built-in React hook with the use context thing, is you wrap the context on some parent and then all of its children can get access to the data within there. So this is a really long way of saying that the tree is really important to understand, because that's how you pass data between components. Like right here, this create to do is going to pass data up to index.tsx, because when I go in here and I type hello world, this is getting filled in here, and I have that within that text field. If we look back at the code right in here, it's this create to do component. That is what's creating all of this down here. So I got that create to do component, and that's going down here into this section right here. And I have this data in here. I have this to do. This data is being stored within here. It's being stored down here in the tree, but I need to get it up to here in the tree. So there's a couple different ways to do that. And typically it's just going to be with prop drilling is the most common way. You can obviously use context, but that's about out of the scope right now. So the way I did it was just via prop drilling. So what I did is I passed in this add to do function. So this is basically what I do is I just call props.add-to-do. I pass in the data from here, and that gets passed back up to index.tsx, which can then go ahead and render the to-dos. All this add to do function is going to be is it's just going to take in some string, and then it's going to set the to-dos accordingly. So it'll just spread out the current ones, and it'll create a new object by putting in this little ID thing. I probably didn't need this. I don't really know why I did this, but you know, it works. It doesn't really matter. You take the end to do. So this data came from that component, gets put in here, and then this, the parent, can pass it down and create these children within this function right here. So it's really important to understand that this is sort of how data flows. And I know I just went through a lot of stuff really fast, and a lot of that probably didn't make a huge amount of sense, but just play around with this demo and look at how it relates to this tree, and kind of just, if you inspect element this as well, you can really see sort of how this works, because this main right here, we have this stuff in here, this box, and then within this box there are children in here. So this top up here, so this form is a child here, and that's in the code. Remember, that was just this, but obviously it gets injected in there at runtime. So that's where all of the data flows, all that stuff comes from. This is a pretty complex thing, but this is the key to understanding complex React and doing things that are more complex and non-trivial than just a to-do app or something like that. The next tip is that SVGs are your friend. Let me show you why. So right here, I have open in Figma a little design. Imagine you were working at some big company or whatever, and they wanted you to go build something, and they gave you all these beautiful designs, but then all of those designs had some custom logos or whatever, and you needed to actually translate those to code. So when I'm given, so just say this is like the hamburger menu for the nav bar or whatever, there are a variety of different ways I could put this into the code, but the way I'm going to do it is with an SVG. So when I'm in here in Figma, what I can do is I can hit export. There's a variety of different options. There's PNG, JPEG, but then the one I'm going to use is SVG. You're probably familiar with the rest, but when I hit SVG, what I can do is I can go ahead and export group 4, and then this is going to download group 4.svg. So when I open it with VS Code, you'll quickly realize this is kind of just some good old-fashioned HTML looking stuff, and it's just markdown tags. And what's really powerful about this is I can now update that shape, and I can easily fit it into my code and into my designs and into my code, because it's now a scalable vector graphic. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this, I'm going to copy it, and then we're going to go back to this index page, and then let's go ahead up here and let's just add a nav bar. So we're going to put a div up here, and then we're going to say h3 nav bar. And then what we're going to also add is we're going to need to add that hamburger menu. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to paste this in right here. So now this is all going to be rendered into my JSX. So what I can do is I go back over to this, and you're going to see this giant monstrosity, which doesn't actually help me at all. But the reason it doesn't help me is because of what I have the width and height set to. So right now the width is set to 1500 and the height is set to 1200 or whatever. What I can then do is let's just go ahead and knock these down to 100 by 100, make it a little more reasonable. And when I go back over here, suddenly we have this more reasonable thing. I could go ahead in here and I could make this into 25, make it even smaller, and now we have a nice little hamburger. It doesn't look the best, but that's just because I designed it poorly, not because SVGs did it poorly. So what's even more nice about this is I can even style this in code. So I can style this like normal, with normal markdown and that kind of thing. So if I go ahead and add a class name to this, what I can do is we could set it absolute like Copilot wants me to do. So let me just show you that. So I set this, and now it's fixed right up there. So obviously you can do this with images as well. You can set their position or whatever, but what you can do that's even crazier in here is you can do stuff like you can change its fill. So see how in here I have this D9, D9, D9 for the fill. Let's say I wanted to change the middle one to just black. Let's just make it 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. This is the only hex code I know off the top of my head. There we go. So now I have gray, black, gray, because I was able to set that in here. And that's how you can do stuff like crazy animations. That's how you can do stuff like that, because now you can grab these properties on these elements that are dynamic images and vectors, and you can manipulate them accordingly. One of probably the best examples I can give you of this being taken to its logical conclusion is my company's site. We used SVGs to make all of these. So we use the D3 library, but we also, these are just SVGs under the hood. And the reason why these are able to be this dynamic and interactive and cool is because they're not just PNGs. This isn't a PNG, this is an SVG. So that's what allows me to get all this dynamic stuff. That's what allows me to go ahead and click on 1 year and it'll move. So the tip I want to give you here is that SVGs are your friend. Learn them, use them. You will make really cool stuff with them. The next tip is to outsource your state management to some library. And the reason why I'm saying this is because this is something I didn't do at the start, and this is something I didn't even realize you could or should do. And I would always, whenever I had to set up state, I would do it the way I did it in here by just having this this set state thing where I'd have to do and set to do. And then every time I needed to update it, I would go all the way in here. I'd set the value, I'd set the on change. And That works to an extent, but that starts to get really, really tedious as your forms expand. And imagine if you had like 15 variables up here for a normal form, or you could turn that into an object, but then you have this giant object that you have to keep track of and manage and do all this stuff. You want to outsource that management, and you want to gain the bonus features of this other stuff. React is great because it has such good support. That's why I use it, is because it has these amazing libraries and plugins like TRPC, Next.js, React Query. All this stuff is amazing, and one of the things that I really like about it too is React Hook Form. This is the most popular sort of management system for your forms, and the way it works is all we have to do right in here is I'll just walk you through the installation. We're going to go ahead and install it. We go ahead and put that in here, and then what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and switch out this right here. So on this guy right here, I'm doing to do, set to do, and all that stuff. Let's switch that out for a hook for a state management system managed by someone else. So what I will do is I'm literally just going to go ahead and grab their example right here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set, whoops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just steal their example right here. So the only thing I need to hold within my inputs is going to be a string. So I will just do type inputs equals bam, and then we'll do, what's it called? Why am I an idiot? Yep. So we'll do to do is the string. So we have that right here. And then all we need to do is just bring this in. So what I'll do is I will just copy this, and then I'm going to copy, and then we'll go ahead and paste that within here. I'm going to go ahead and add my imports. So VS Code's great. Just command dot. I hit this. We'll go back over here, and we will go ahead and update my submit handler. We're going to go ahead and change this guy in here to actually become this down here. So I don't need this e.prevent default anymore, because that's just to prevent the form from on submitting refreshing the page. That will now be handled by React Hook Form. I can go ahead and just delete this. We'll go ahead and paste that in here. We'll switch this out for data, and then we will go, we'll do data.todo, and then we'll go ahead and delete this. We will go ahead and we'll keep register. We don't need watch, and yeah, let's not pretend I'm going to play with errors here, but that is something that you can do. That's definitely something I recommend you do. It's just I'm lazy and irresponsible and want to make this somewhat brief. So we go ahead and change in here. Now we need to set up our form itself. So on submit, all we need to do is now just do handle submit and pass in our on submit function. And now the last thing we need to do is actually register our inputs. So the way we were registering them before was by setting the value in on change. We're going to delete that. We're going to change this. And we're going to do ... So the spread operator, and we're going to call register, pass it in. And we can even add some validation in here to make it required. I'm not going to get into that here, but there's a ton of crazy stuff you can do, and you should definitely take the time to learn about this, read about this. The best way to learn is to do, so go do that. And then right here, let's just do here, let's do register and then to do. So we'll register our to do. We'll delete that name because it already registers it. We'll delete the state. We will go ahead and delete that. And then now our state is being handled by some external thing. And obviously that didn't change too much for this tiny example, but if we had to scale this up, it'll make it way easier. And it also makes it way easier to handle more complex data types because they have management and built-in solutions for all that stuff. If you want to do custom date handling, have fun, you're not going to enjoy it. With all of that out of the way, we now have this right here. Let's go ahead and do hello world. We hit create, and there it is. It works just like it did before, but now we are using someone else's state management system, which is going to make it way easier to scale up our forms, implement type safety, all that stuff. The final tip is another one that's probably going to fall under the category of kind of weird for really experienced people, but this is tailored towards stuff that idiot me didn't know 3 months ago. Stuff that idiot me didn't know a year ago, and it's stuff that I think is very helpful. And this is going to be, you can inject JavaScript and JS literally anywhere, even in strings. And let me show you why that actually matters. These days, one of the most popular ways to actually handle your classes and your styles is Tailwind. It's my preferred method. It's most people's preferred method at this point, and for good reason. But one thing that you can do with that is when you're setting your class names, you can set conditionals on there, and you can actually inject dynamic class names with JSX that are tied to state. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me show you an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this string to be one that's handled by JavaScript itself. So whenever you bring in these curly braces, you're escaping into JS world, and then you can start handling it accordingly. And if you just put something in there like this, so this is just going to return a string out here. So what I can now do is let's add some dynamic stuff in here. So let's add right here, let's delete this text neutral. Let's delete that text neutral, and let's go ahead and add some dynamic code. So let's just say 1 equals 2, and then we'll add a question mark here. And then if 1 is equal to 2, we will put in, let's just do text-red-500 because JavaScript would indeed be broken. And then if it's not true, then we'll go ahead and just put text-green-500. So what we did right there is it's going to yell at me because obviously they have no overlap, thank goodness, and we can go in here and we can see that it's green because there's no overlap on those two things. Or we could do a better example like name test dot length is greater than 0. We can go ahead and do that right here, and we can say that it is in fact greater than 0, so it's red. And this is not a useful example that I put out right here, but the concept is if, say, for example, you have a thing where, say, for example, I wanted to have a check mark feature for these to-dos, and I wanted to add a mark done feature right here. When I click that mark done feature, that would change some internal state about the to-dos that would set like completed to true. And when I set completed to true, I would want to check that Boolean. And then if that Boolean is true, I would want to add the strike through property to my tailwind. So you can imagine how you would do that. It'd be very simple. You can just open up these curly braces, then use this nice string manipulation thing where you can just do $ bracket and put JS into a string really easily. And suddenly you now have dynamic strings that change with state. And a little bonus tip is, well, two is one, state is anything that will manipulate the view. So anytime your state changes, your view will refresh, and then refs are stuff that are not tied to that. So that's another thing to remember. It's very useful, very important. State is the building block of basically everything in React. And the final little thing I'll leave you with is these guys exist. I didn't know these existed for a long time either, but they're really helpful. If there are situations where you need to return, you can only return one child, because remember way back when we were talking about that sort of way back in the tree example, here app.tsx only has one child, but it could have multiple, just like here. This is when you have multiple children, but sometimes it can only have one direct descendant. Like a great example of that is a map function. So I actually use that in here. So right here, I have this empty bracket to just turn it into one child, because if I deleted this, if I delete that, it's going to yell at me because I can't have multiple children return from this. So I have to only return one, but I don't want to add another div to the markdown. So I just put this in here, and that way we can fill it up. Not worthy of a full spot, but definitely something to be aware of. I hope this helps you guys out. I know I rambled a lot on the tree step, but it's a very important concept and something that I think is definitely important for everyone to know. And then the rest of them are just things that are going to help you make really cool stuff and make it even better. So if you made it this far, thank you. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and we'll talk again soon.